so much stuff that has happened this week, and in particular, the boycott by the NBA players and the subsequent meetings that had taken place between the players and the owners, the players deciding to come back. But all that happened after the NBA players decided not to play, with the WNBA players, with Major League Baseball players, NHL hockey players, MLS soccer players. I really thought this would be a great time to bring Howard Wright back to the show. Howard Wright was a superstar high school basketball player in San Diego at Patrick Henry High School. He went on to become an All-American at Stanford. He then moved on to the NBA, where he played with Shaquille O'Neal and the Orlando Magic, played internationally as well, has had a great career as an executive at Qualcomm and at Intel, and now joining us via Zoom. And back on 1090, Howard. That's the other thing.
Congratulations.
Thanks. We're podcasting, but we're also on the radio. So, Howard Wright, thank you for being back here in your hometown of San Diego. How you doing?
I'm doing okay today, Scotty. And I'll tell you, I appreciate that we were able to push this 24 hours so I could have time to gather my thoughts and have a cognitive, discussion with you versus an emotional discussion. So a couple things I wanted to share, which is one, really appreciate you keep using your platform for allyship. You're willing to listen, you're willing to learn, you're willing to emote some raw feelings, and it's okay because we need those long form adult conversations now, not the fights on Twitter or Facebook. Second thing I would love to add, if I could preempt just a little bit, which is today marks the 65th anniversary of the mutilation, torture, and killing of Emmett Till. Emmett Till is 14 years old. He goes down from Chicago down to visit his relatives in Mississippi. He is falsely accused of insulting a white woman. Later that night, a white militia vigilantes come to the house where he is staying, grab this 14-year-old child out of his bed, and whisk him away into the night. Several days later, they find his mutilated body in the Tallahatchie River, and the mother of Emmett Till does something that is unbelievable to this day. As a father, I can't stomach even the concept. She makes the funeral home director have an open casket funeral of her child, and all that happens. That's a seminal moment in our American history, and it's really not talked about a lot in the schools that I grew up in. That's 65 years ago today. So when you ask me how I was doing, Scotty, as a black man, I'm obviously sad of what's happened to Eric Gardner and Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin, and now this shooting of Jacob Blake. But I feel like I'm in mourning for 65 years of these things, and we have not addressed them in a meaningful way to dismantle systematic racism in this country that we love. So sorry to put all that heaviness on you at the start, Scott, but that's the hole that I'm in right now, trying to get myself out of.
You know what's so interesting about listening to you talk is last time we were together and we had James Blake with us.
Yeah.
And I remember James saying the other day, he said that when he got attacked by the cops in New York and he went back to all of his white friends who are tennis players, you know what they all said? They were like, gosh, man, that happens to you? Oof, wow. It's like they didn't even look at him as black, right, in a weird way. You have lived such an amazing life because your father was a Charger player. He was a philanthropist. You were well educated. You were a Stanford guy. You played in the NBA. You played around the world. You've had an incredible career as an executive. So I think sometimes people misunderstand that just because you've been super successful, that you don't feel it the same way many underserved communities would feel. But when you talk, I know how you feel. I can see your glasses, fogging up, man. I mean, I know you feel it, It doesn't matter that you grew up with any privilege of any kind or you've lived a charmed life. It doesn't matter. You're still a black man.
Yeah. And so you know me very well, Scotty, and almost any of my hashtags on any of my social media posts are almost always luckiest dude ever. From my mother, my father, the ancestors that came before me, my brothers and sisters, my wife and children. I appreciate and have gratitude for the opportunities that have been put in front of me. I also take pride in the fact that every opportunity or door that was slightly ajar, I tried to kick it down. What the lack of empathy, I think, in some of our white allies is, oh, that guy is different. He must not have rage that sits underneath the surface. He must not be as mad as some of the protesters in Kenosha or in Ferguson, Missouri, for that matter. It is the interconnectedness and the through line, Scotty, that if this were happening every other week to Jewish Americans, to Japanese Americans, to Indigenous Americans, and it had been going on for decades and decades, and we wouldn't bring to the forefront of a, again, long-form conversation, then it belittles the suffering and it dismisses what is, racially accurate about this country. I love this country. I'm not going anywhere. I have a right to criticize her because I love her so much. And that's stolen from James Baldwin.
All right, let me just tell everybody, because for those of you that are watching on podcast, you can see this is Howard Wright. But for those of you that happen to be listening on audio podcast or on radio, Howard Wright was a superstar high school basketball player at Patrick Henry High School, an All-American at Stanford, an NBA player, an executive with Qualcomm and now Intel, I think, right? Still Howard, okay. And somebody that when these sorts of things happen, we come to Howard to say, let's have these conversations. Browner, you want to jump in here, man?
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, Howard, specifically about James Baldwin. I think this country as a whole, because black people have been here since the inception of it, and being here for that long has allowed people to be desensitized to the treatment of African Americans in this country. Because, again, Asian people came in at a time we were basically a developed country. For the most part, Jewish awareness came as we were already a developed country. The pain and suffering that black people have gone through in this country came through with its growth. And so people, honestly, I feel like we're woven, the pain and the hurt is woven into American history, and it's been ignored or desensitized for so long. It's hard for people to empathize with black people because it's grained within the system. So when a black person says, oh, this is racist, they're seen as complaining, or they're seen as a person who, oh, you need to just be quiet. Don't you have enough already?
Yeah, and so that is specifically poignant right now as it relates to a lot of the country's attitude towards NBA players. Why would LeBron complain? Why would CP3 or George Hill complain, or any of the athletes? You understand the statistical anomaly of being to come from where LeBron came from to be on top of the media and sports empire? He is a voice for the voiceless. We are trying to be voices for the voiceless. The work, Scotty, you've been down to Pro Kids. The work that we're trying to do down there is for kids that will never get on this show, but have every God-given right to enjoy the civil liberties that are put forth in the Constitution. You hit on something that is extremely personal for me, which is even the way African-American history is introduced in modern society. It starts with slavery. We were kings and queens before we were slaves in this country, and that is somehow passed over so that there is a benign racism in terms of the way the history is taught, and it devalues, diminishes, and dilutes my value as a black man still to this day. And again, the reckoning of all of these things in these conversations, I hope they're done in a open forum and discussions and Zooms like this, because otherwise the alternative, it becomes they're done in the street past curfew, people have long rifles, and people have ill intent to loot and rob.
When you see what's happening in the NBA bubble in Orlando right now, and I'm Alex, by the way, nice to meet you finally.
Hey, Alex.
we've had this conversation of what is the point, or what does it do, or what is, besides bring attention to what they want attention brought to. You yourself, what do you want to see next? Because obviously a lot of attention came to the bubble, not just from ESPN and sports outlets. It was news. It was national news. But what comes next? What would you like to see next? I saw today NBA arenas will be turned into voting places during the election. So there's progress. The state Senate in Wisconsin is gathering because of the Bucks phone calls to the lieutenant governor. What do you want to see come from the NBA bubble while they're still playing there for the next 2 months?
Thank you so much for that question, Alex, because I just do not want to be a complainer. I would like to be, or aspire to be, a man of action. I personally have a handful of things. I would like to see the end of, qualified immunity for police officers. I'd also like to see the officers who shot and killed Breonna Taylor and the officer who shot and wounded Jacob Blake arrested. We need a national database for officers' behavior in this country right now. The officer who shot and killed the 12-year-old Tamir Rice had the audacity to then go to another state and try to sign up as a law enforcement officer. I believe it was in Georgia. In no world should that happen. You are clearly not qualified to do that. What LeBron and CP3 and others have just announced in partnership with the NBA Board of Governors in terms of turning the arenas into voting centers is another fantastic step forward. I have every confidence that this generation players are going to seize this moment because the world is watching. They've literally understood the leverage and the political capital that they hold, and they're going to use it for good. Not every step will be a linear step in the perfectly right direction, but they're going to demand justice that should have been really just part of our normal world, and it is not. So those are a handful of things that I would like to see, but also my counterparts. I would love to hear what other folks have in mind in terms of, can we get a containable list, 5-6 things that make sense, and we jointly try to pursue those things together.
Howard, I've always felt like this was going to be a difficult uphill climb, simply because this shouldn't be their fight. This shouldn't be an athlete's fight. This is a political issue. This is a civil rights issue. So you're having a bunch of guys who've dedicated their life to their profession now trying to do something in a completely different field of play, keeping it in a sports world. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be messy. I was very critical because my thing is, why boycott without a plan ready to go? Because it makes them look unprepared. And I know how, once that gets in the political world, how that can be spent by people who do it for a living. And so to watch these guys kind of try to figure this out on the fly, I'm proud of them. I'm impressed by what they've been able to do, but I'm also going to remain critical because the plan is what's most important.
So I push back just a little bit for the sake of this discussion, which is, in any of our houses right now, does everybody agree with what candidate they should vote for, what dinner they should have, what movie they should stream? We're in the middle of the eye of this storm. And I think there's some good intention, especially from George Hill and the Bucks, and some probably mismanagement and miscommunication in terms of the messaging. And that's why I think LeBron and CP3 and others took back the reins and said, wait a second, we're going to have conversations with Michelle Roberts and the Board of Governors and Commissioner Silver, and then we're going to have one united message that goes forward. And that's basically where we are right now. The emotions are running so high and are so raw, and given the proximity of Kenosha to the Bucks, I'll give them some grace on that one. But the distance that we have to travel in terms of the execution of these plans and these new policies, this is police reform. This is education reform. These are institutions that have been in place since 1776. And it was built when you and I were 3/5 of a human being.
Yes.
And now we are supposed to, in a utopia way, act like the original sin of slavery or the original sins of all of our fathers do not affect us today. This is one of the things that, as horrible as COVID has been, it has forced everybody into their living room to watch this unfold in real time. Again, these are our open casket moments, just like Emmett Till. And history will judge us on how we step up collectively, not just how a Medgar, a Martin, or a Malcolm step up. It's how do we, the conscientious, educated folks among us, demand a better steady state for our electorate and for our company, our country.
Howard, let me ask you this. Do you think that the four of us here and people who are listening because they're sports fans, do you think we're caught up in this where we think that these athletes and their protests and their solidarity can really create change, even though we've already seen, hey, phone call to the lieutenant governor, let's have some conversations. That's good. Having voting stations at arenas, excellent. But I'm just asking, do you think that we're caught up because we're close to sports and then maybe the outside world isn't real? You said they're seeing them. Everybody's watching the bubble, but is everybody hearing? What do you think?
No, I just think that's your own personal, empathy meter. Some folks that we're never going to communicate with or never going to hear the message, whether you write in all caps or not, Scotty. The consensus that that I think exists in this country is I don't care who you vote for. I do care that we align our mission so that there's equality and that we dismantle these systematic, racially unjust policies, or get out and vote out DAs, vote out AGs, vote out governors and mayors. One of the stories that I heard is after all this complaining in one of the calls with Inside the Bubble, that Doc Rivers challenged the NBA players. How many of you are registered to vote right now? And so the personal responsibility to affect change, not just every 4 years, but down ballot, and what we do with our local elections, I believe this moment of increased consciousness will result more in a movement and not just a moment. Let's hope. At least my fingers are crossed on that, Scotty.
Well, that was a really interesting point, by the way. Doc Rivers, I wonder what the number was. I wonder if there were if there were 150 players sitting there, how many of them were, how many of them weren't. And it's interesting. I didn't even think about it like this, but I'm starting to see commercials now with NFL players suggesting, hey, register to vote. And I wonder how many of them are just faces versus how many of them are really active.
I thought what the Lions did when the Lions canceled their practice, I thought what they did in the aftermath of that was far more impressive than them actually canceling the practice. They made sure every one of their players was registered to vote after they canceled their practice. And I think that is the undertone of what we need to be focusing on.
And what we're seeing is perhaps a series of alliances that could have or should have happened, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But the uniqueness of what LeBron is trying to do, not just the I Promise School, but the voting registration. And I give another example of the Equal Justice Initiative and Southern Poverty Law Center. These are nonprofits, but living in the nonprofit world, that's difficult to raise the necessary dollars every year. You get a combination of forces of the millions, if not billions of dollars of awareness, brand, and cash, coupled with some of the most powerful 501c3s that can actually affect change, we're going to see years from now the best of this come together. And then there's also going to weed out the players that, what you just said, that just want to be a spokesperson or a brand ambassador for that. That time is coming past. Go represent Coca-Cola, Pepsi, or any AT&T or Verizon. This is going to be hand-to-hand combat, and you're going to need to be educated. You need to bring your authentic self to it, and you're going to need to bring your followers with you, and you're going to need to bring your cash. And so again, I commend you, Scotty, because I listen to the show all the time, and you consistently use your platform for something other than yourself. Is a safe place to learn and to debate. And we don't have to agree, but we certainly don't have to be disagreeable on the things that we disagree with each other about.
All right, Howard, you got more time, or you got to roll?
Sure.
You got more time? Good. Okay, stick around. I want to spend a little bit more time with Howard Wright. Everybody who's listening on radio, don't go anywhere. More with Howard Wright. For those of you that are with us on podcast and on video, just stay right where you are. More with Howard Wright coming right back. Friday afternoon here on Scott Kaplan and Crew defined as Grande Alejandro and my man John Browner. And with us this afternoon, and I'm really happy about this. See, this was my goal. I did not want to go back to radio and do radio. I wanted to keep doing these long format kinds of conversations and then keep them in the podcast world and then broadcast them on radio. So this is the difference now, is that we can go deeper into these subjects with Howard Wright. Howard Wright, for those of you that are just getting with us, if you're podcasting with us and you're on video, you've been here. But if you're just getting through a commercial break on radio, listen. Howard Wright was a star basketball player at Patrick Henry High School. His father, Ernie Wright, was a star football player for the Chargers. His father, who, as I know the story, lived kind of in the community. You know, I don't want to call it the hood. He lived amongst the community. And he said, I got to do something for my community. I got to do something for these kids. I got to make sure these kids aren't on the streets and they're not underserved and they're not getting in trouble with drugs and violence. And he created Pro Kids. And Pro Kids became this safe haven for kids in San Diego to get off the streets, get in front of a computer, get out on a golf course, and to really be shown that people care, really, and that you can be something. And Howard has taken over Pro Kids from his father. And Howard, not only Patrick Henry, Stanford All-American, NBA player, Qualcomm executive, Intel executive, and we're having a very deep conversation today about the heaviness, Howard, of this week. We've been going at it for a little while. So where's your mind at right now?
The mind is actually, during this conversation, supplementing some optimism for the cynicism that I had been maybe suffering through. Is this, reckoning on race and the conversations that need to take place are long overdue. They shouldn't just take place, me and you on a golf course in Cabo or something like that. They should be done in public, in long form, and I should learn something, and hopefully you'll learn something, or we both be better. Our IQs both go up as a result of a genuine human conversation.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Let me ask you about Michael Jordan. So, yeah. Okay, so Browner, when George Floyd happened in the aftermath, I said, if I were the Minnesota Vikings, I'd go sign Colin Kaepernick. And Browner refuted that and said, no, because then you're just giving them what they want. You're giving the NFL what they want. Oh, story in Minnesota, Kaepernick needs to get back into the league, sign him in Minnesota. And Browner kind of put me down on that. Oh, bad idea. I wonder, though, about Michael Jordan. Was Michael Jordan, is he being hailed as something he is or is not? I'm not sure. I don't know. I love Michael Jordan. I do have a different opinion of him after the documentary.
Yeah.
but I do wonder, though, did Michael Jordan do something heroic where it was like, okay, all the older players, the leaders, they look to Jordan and we'll do whatever he says because we just kiss the ground he walks on? Or was he, because he's the only African-American man who's an owner, was he, and I'm putting this in quotes, was he used by the owners? Hey, Michael, you're one of us now. Go in there and tell them what to do.
No.
I'm asking.
I don't think so. I've heard folks describe Michael Jordan as defectively competitive. And all of us that watched the Last Dance and know him just a little bit anecdotally. So, okay, yeah, he was defectively, maniacally focused when he was a player. And in the 80s, you really didn't speak about politics unless you were, again, going to speak about everything. And so he deflected and he deferred. And I would imagine that he has maybe just a tiny bit of regret of that. And now with this opportunity to have the most uniquely qualified voice in that room. In addition, he happens to be African-American. In addition, he happens to be Michael Jordan. But the bridge from where these players are, especially LeBron, to where he would like to go, ownership and brand awareness at a level that, all of us aspire to. I think he can be a very important mediator, moderator. He can create a detente inside that room that I don't know if the other sports leagues have that. You don't have the Michael Jordan of another sport that can facilitate progress in a way. And I think he's going to be a quiet captain and voice of this progress that we're seeing. It's slow and steady, not nearly as fast as any of us would like, but it is slow and steady progress, and we're going to need all the help that we can get.
Today's Go
ahead, Alex, jump in.
I want to say, today's Jackie Robinson Day in baseball. So everybody's going to be, wearing number 42. There's going to be, I'm sure, endless amounts of tributes to Jackie Robinson. And something you touched upon earlier, which I think is super important, is what does LeBron know about, these people and their problems and this and that? It's empathy. And I think in this country, and I've said it in the show, we lack so much empathy. We look for excuses right away. Jacob Blake was a felon. Jacob Blake was this. Jacob Blake was reaching for a knife. George Floyd, he didn't listen to police. We're always looking for excuses to justify the murder of what is happening to people across the country. And it's not even a question. I just want to talk about
black people across the country.
I just want to talk about empathy. And if we just had to stop justifying what is happening and just have some empathy to what is happening, I think that could be, first of all, like the first change, the easiest change. Stop trying to justify what is happening and start listening to what is happening.
Yeah, Alex, you hit on that not just today, but consistently. It's threaded and themed through your, through the podcast. And we really appreciate that. There's an empathy deficit that exists in this country. And because now everybody has a platform, the easiest way is to strike back, is to lash back, to try to have a zinger, to get somebody on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, when in fact a deeper awareness and series of conversations need to take place. So we have to appeal to our better angels, because there are times that I may see something on TV or it happens in the world, and I might text Scott something that I would never say on live radio or on a podcast, but that's the rawness of the emotion. And so now the adults in the collective rooms have to align, have to lock arms and not lock shoulders and go forward, because this has the alternative is incredibly scary, in that you'd have summer of COVID, summer of all of these atrocities going into November election year, and we see what happens. We're seeing the trailer to the movie of a civil war that could happen in the streets, in the cities that we love, that we've all visited, that happen after police brutality is filmed and nothing happens as a result. Administrative leave is not a result. Again, I go back to, we're not just mourning one, not just mourning Aubrey or George Floyd. It is, we've been scarred deeply, or at least I feel deeply scarred in mourning all of the folks of color that have been innocent, that have been maimed, killed, incarcerated, and we did not get to see the video. And if you put on body cams and you turn those on, that's one way to solve all this mythology of, oh, he was reaching for, I feared for my life. This, again, let's take bold step forward together and try to pull ourselves collectively out of the hole that we're in.
On the question that Scott brought up about Jordan, whether he's being used or not, this goes back to what I wrote about in the Union Tribune, is that it's important to have Michael Jordan in that room because you now have a person. You may disagree with his politics, but Michael Jordan grew up as a black man in the South. And so some of those things that he went through to become Michael Jordan are worth it in that room because those white owners did not do that. They never been in the skin, regardless of how famous Michael Jordan is. Michael Jordan still had family members who were going through struggles as being black in America, similar to LeBron James and Chris Paul. And so Michael Jordan can speak to certain things and reach these guys in a way that these owners can't. And I think like Mark Cuban can't, like Tillman Fertitta can't. I think this is what having a black voice in that room and ownership, this is where it comes in handy in situations like this, being able to reach across the table in a respectful manner and open the dialogue of discussion and let the floodgates come in of conversation, as opposed to one wall here and one wall there and people just trying to break each other's wall down to have a victory.
You hit on something with is kind of the consciousness of the NBA Board of Governors. So think about Michael Jordan, Vivek at the Kings, Cuban, Ted Leonsis, Joseph Tsai. I mean, the NBA is almost top to bottom, with the exception of a few. I mean, you think about Ballmer and others and Jeannie Buss. There's a social consciousness that they own and they occupy and they live in it. And now this summer of 2020, we're being called into let's materially, legislatively, actually affect change versus somebody read the morning paper or see the evening news and say, oh, that's really bad what happened to that kid way off in this distant land, which is just, several states away. Jordan in particular, I think can command a room, any room that he's in, and has both of his ears allow him to emote some empathy that perhaps the other side wouldn't hear otherwise. So I'm extraordinarily optimistic that the residual of what happens downstream with these NBA players as well as the Board of Governors is going to be a start of some meaningful change for us in a positive way.
All right, Howard Wright is with us this afternoon, and Howard was with us. This is going back right after George Floyd, and we had a summit. We had Howard, and we had James Blake, and we had Landon Donovan, and we had Shelley Zimmerman, the former chief of police here in San Diego. And Howard has become an all-time favorite amongst great friends. And, this week was so heavy, and Browner and Alex were both like, can we get Howard back on? Because we'd really like to talk to Howard and see what he thinks about it. Howard, let me ask you this. Do you think that the players would have made a stronger message leaving, or because there was all this talk that maybe LeBron was going to leave and Kawhi wanted to leave and the Lakers and the Clippers were thinking that they should end the bubble. You think they made the right choice by staying to play, or do you think they maybe should have made a stronger statement by bailing?
I believe that they did the right thing by staying. And my first inclination was to boycott, shut everything down, and then have the billionaires, the millionaires, the RSNs, the networks, the international sponsors all, call for some change. But once all the players would have left the bubble, that inertia, that energy, that optimism and cohesiveness that they're doing right now by physically being together, and they can all understand, we'll have a bigger, wider, their platform is infinitely larger now. Their platform and what's going on is pretty much the second lead to every national news program in the world right now. It's the Hurricanes or it's the DNC or RNC, but what's happening in terms of social consciousness in and around the NBA as the centerpiece of it.
Yeah, the leaders.
Yeah, I'm glad that they have stayed, and I'm so curious as to now, it's not just you see Black Lives Matter on a T-shirt or on a court or say their names on a jersey. The real work starts now, and you're going to see the antibodies come out to try to fight it, and you're going to see the warriors of justice, stay on the right side of history and fight this very good fight. And as John Lewis would say, get into some good trouble right now.
Yeah,
Something just
funny.
popped in my head right now. And, JB's been asking what's next. You talked about what you want to see. You had a list of things that you wanted to see that happens in the NBA bubble. Jim Trotter today is reporting about NFL players, prominent NFL players, saying they're going to sit out games in strike or boycott. What if players just say, in this list, you have X amount of things on the list. First thing on the list, the cops that killed Breonna Taylor must be arrested. We are not playing until that happens.
So now you have tapped into, I told Scotty that my inner Malcolm debates with my inner Martin every single day. But Alex, you've allowed me to now expose what my inner Malcolm has said, which is if you shut all of this entertainment down, because none of this is essential. NBA is not essential. NFL is not essential. You shut all this entertainment by majority Black athletes down and demand almost a sit-in, it would become incredibly uncomfortable. And what if they demanded, allow me to read from some of my notes, a national database for all law enforcement officers, end of qualified police immunity, ban the use of chokeholds, make lynching a federal hate crime, ban no-knock warrants, and then Alex, as you just mentioned, arrest the murderers of Breonna Taylor and the cop that shot Jacob Blake, and just have a good old-fashioned 1961-62 sit-in until. I know that would be explosive, and that's probably the nuclear option. I believe that calmer heads, more of the Martin Luther King style philosophy leadership, which is how can we use this moment to bring awareness and then change legislation federally as well as in the states. And I believe that the Martin voice is going to win here, and changes are coming very soon.
Howard, let me ask you this, because Browner and I have been going back and forth on this for the first couple of days, which was, well, okay, what's next? And I think what we've kind of learned is that not having a plan was fine. It shut everything down. It forced everybody to go to work together. Okay, fine. Howard, and we only have about 2 minutes left, but I want to get your opinion on this. When are people like yourself, Stanford, All-American, philanthropist, business executive, when is someone like yourself going to say, you know what, I've got a great family, I've made some money in my life, you know what I need to do? I need to get into, I have to go affect change, and you're a very electable person, so what do you think, man? I mean, is there a future there for you? And I'm not trying to force you into politics, hardly, but it happens all the time where business people become elected officials. So what do you say?
I haven't really given much thought to it, honestly, Scott. I'm not trying to be flippant about it, which is when I think about some of the leaders that I admire, there are some politicians in there, but most of them were not politicians. If I think about how can I be the next Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative, more than I think about how can I be the next, Cory Booker, who is a buddy from Stanford. There's some part of corruptibility that once you get inside of that, my fear is, from the outside looking in, that you become part of only wanting to get reelected versus the person who can actually affect change. There's once in a generation, John Lewis or some of these other iconic leaders. I don't rule anything out for my life. It just hasn't been a calling for me, simply because there's so much work that we have to do that I don't want to be tied to some political party or some ideology. I would like to, I'm just getting comfortable in my own skin, representing myself and my own brand, and to, I don't know, to acquiesce to someone else's political agenda that is handed down from DC, and then you just recite on CNN or Fox the talking points. That sounds like a misuse of some of the time and some of the talents that we collectively have. We'll still vote and encourage folks to vote. It just hasn't been a calling on my life thus far, Scotty.
I just asked because the answer really, as you were saying, it was because I'm doing my part. I'm just doing it out here. I'm doing it not as an elected official. I'm doing it rather as someone who's, spearheading pro kids and being philanthropic and raising kids and so on. Hey, Howard, I know John would love to keep going, and as would I, but I'm telling you, man, we are out of time, dude.
Yeah, because real quick, I'll make this 30 seconds. I feel like the answer to the question is this. If you have 1,000 people marching, one person should run for governor, 100 of those people should run for a House seat, 50 of those people should run for a Senate seat, and that's how you spark the change, because you get people actually in the grassroots trying to affect the actual system.
That's right. Good point.
Howard, we look forward to the next time, Howard. Thank you very much, and thanks for cooling down for 24 hours before you came on.
Thanks, Scotty. Miss you. Hope to see you soon.
Too.